The cost of offensive weapons is so low right now. They only have to be right once and they're cheap. But they can take out a $10 million system, no problem. The only real solution is kinetic. Don't sit around at the high-value target. You got to go out after where they are. You got to hit them before they hit you. The price to intercept has to go down. There's no way about it. Because the price of a strike is so small right now. We're taking this technology and bringing it to scale. That's the future. Machines against machines. That's what we're looking at. Tens of thousands of machines against machines.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Wilhelm Meya, founder and CEO of AdlerAerospace, a defense tech company building heavy-lift UAVs, counter-drone systems, and the Talis family of autonomous interceptors. Adler was just selected for the Pentagon's Drone Dominance Program and the DARPA Heavy Lift Challenge, which is awesome, by the way, so congrats. Wilhelm, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Oh, that's great. Well, to start off, your background is rather unique to then be coming into defense. So why don't you share what you did before you've founded Adler, and then what really triggered you to think, I'm going to go into defense tech?
Yeah, good question. I get that quite often. In my previous career, I ran linguistic technology companies, and we worked all over the world doing really cool linguistic apps, building dictionaries, and kind of like Duolingo type things. And that was a lot of fun. And I got my degrees in linguistics and so forth. But I've always had a passion for aviation. I've been a private pilot now going on 10 or 15 years. Fly a Cirrus, and it's always been a huge passion and dream of mine. So for a second career, I thought I would jump into the aerospace industry, and it's really been super exciting. It's just a fun place to be, super dynamic. I can use all my kind of engineering and aviation chops and, work through all the different technologies. The great thing about this space is it's moving so quickly, and, we see things that are innovative one day and then 6 months later already obsolete. So it's a great industry to be in, especially if you're a smaller company and have the ability to move quickly and innovate. And we think Adler Aerospace can do that. It does that. And so it's been a great journey.
So what was the idea? When did you found it, and what was the idea behind it?
Well, Adler focuses really on working with emerging technologies, especially those coming out of Ukraine. Also, very innovative technologies in Europe and other places. We take those technologies, we integrate them. Sometimes we put other technologies together and create a full integrated package and then work with customers there. We've been doing this about 2 years. And we really enjoy, working with manufacturers all over the world, and also bringing some of those products and manufacturing them in the U.S. as well. So it's a little bit of everything, but we do both on the UAV side. We do FPVs, obviously through drone dominance. We do heavy lift UAVs, which is a particular class of UAVs that are designed to basically lift objects, heavy objects. Our Atlas 6 platform, for example, currently can lift 50 kilos or 110 pounds and fly for over 10 hours. And so that's a great deal of versatility there. We also do interceptors. That's a kind of a counter UAS space as well, where we have 3 different platforms designed to take out Group 3 UAVs like Shaheds. And we also do other things like drone detectors and jammers and a number of other platforms as well. So as I said, it's an exciting space to be in, and lots of great opportunities, and things move very quickly.
Yeah, but you finished I'm still trying to pull the thread. You finished working at your linguistics company, successful there. And they're like, I'm going to go build a drone. I'm going to go build. Did you have someone you were working with that gave you what was that true? It's like, I'm going to go do this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know. I mean, it's essentially, the person you were when you're 20, you don't want to be exactly when you're 50 either. You know what I mean? And it's important to be able to adapt and change, and things and your taste change. And I think that definitely happened to me. And That's why, life and work is so exciting because it's gives you the opportunity to do different things. So yeah, life is short. You do what you want, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think that's great. But did you like go, you looked at Ukraine and go, there's a lot of interesting things happening, or
It's a little bit of that, of course. Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on in Ukraine that is very exciting, and I have an international background as well, so I German and Polish and things like that. So it definitely made it easier to work internationally. Yeah, I go to Ukraine quite regularly. It's a beautiful country, great people. Work with a lot of different Ukrainian companies, and it's going to be a powerhouse. It's amazing what's going to happen out of there when the war ends. There's thousands of companies doing some really amazing things, and it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens there.
so it sounds like you're building the platforms and then integrating technologies, kind of on an open system architecture kind of idea. Is that how you're approaching this, or am I misreading that a little bit?
No, so for example, we'll work with numerous different providers. Let's say we do interceptors, and we have different on that a full air defense architecture. Entails the radar. So we'll work with 3 or 4 different radar companies, Retia, Saab, others. Then we work with different C2 companies to provide that. In particular, we work with JISR, Auto Czech Republic. We have a number of our interceptors are also made in Czech Republic. We integrate those. We do a bunch of other different things as well. I mean, there's AI systems comes from Romania, some of the hardware, from other countries and so forth. So it's a process, putting together all the different partners and working it through the different phases to get a viable system.
And you literally started this 2.5 years ago.
Well, look, Dave, I have some skills, so let's just put it that way.
Well, I love it, man. How do you work with the U.S.? Because a lot of times they're I'd say more protagonistic approach when you're dealing with foreign technologies integrating into like U.S. architectures. How have you navigated that?
Well, first off, we work pretty much with all the NATO standards, so that kind of levels the playing field there. So, for example, with our radar and C2 systems, all of it is NATO standards. So it's Sapient and Asterix and all of that. So as long as we stick with the NATO standards, it's all pretty much the same setup in terms of the technology. So that's easy. Frankly, most of the U.S., as a pilot yourself, you know that if the international language of ATC is English and all the basic, you get trained in the U.S., you can do things anywhere in the world. So that's pretty much the basics here. And again, the U.S. has so much standing, around the world. So it opens a lot of doors and, keeps everything going. To answer your question more specifically, I think that, in some ways, the primes and the major defense companies are still not really, but still a little bit in the old, Cold War kind of mindset. Big exquisite systems with multi-billion dollar budgets and 10-year product development cycles and all the rest of that. And I think at the same time you're seeing a lot of interest and I think beyond interest, just a lot of everyone's seeing what's happening in Ukraine. Everyone's seeing that the U.S. is behind in certain critical areas, and I think there's a lot of effort being made right now to kind of bridge that gap. And that involves working with allied partners in Europe because right now, 90% of the best drones are in Europe and on the FPV side and certainly some of the other sides as well. And when I mean best, I mean cost effective and resistant to, you know, GNSS denied space, EW, all the rest of that kind of stuff, and basically battle hardened. And we're kind of in a, and so I think there's a lot of interest, I think, on the U.S. defense side to see what happen, what's happening in Europe, take the best of that and bring it back for programs like Drone Dominance and many others.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to that in a second, but you're building a lot of different type of platforms as well, right? So you got the heavy lift, you got your SPV, you've got Talos, a lot of companies are just picking one and they're just trying to do their best on that. Talking about your decision, you're pretty broad. How big's your company? Like it.
Yeah, we also we do deep strike. We do a bunch of other platforms as well. I mean, like I said, it's a very dynamic space. So I think it's important to have a broad, some people have called us like the Walmart of drones. I mean, which is funny, but it's true. I mean, you just take the best of all of that and bring it out. You also do not know what is going to be effective, one day to the next. So from a business perspective, putting all the eggs in one basket is not a good idea. Like, you put all your eggs in an FPV basket, and that's a mistake. Just because, first off, FPVs are kind of a commodified, saturated place already. We're at the Model T version of what FPVs are, and we don't know what that's going to look like down the road. There's hundreds of companies doing that. Most of them are using the hobbyist style carbon X-wing style thing, and moving on from there. It's a pretty difficult space to be in. So again, just from a business perspective, we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, and we have to see where the technology unfolds. As I said, drones is a big paradigm shift. Every one of these drones is really at the Model T biplane era version of this whole situation. The more horses we have in the race, the more likely we'll find those winners that will make it through all the way. So again, this is early stage of a growing industry.
And so one of the challenges, I'm just because I found this just fascinating. So are you building this all in-house? All these in-house? Like, do you own the manufacturing?
Yeah, so we do some manufacturing. We have some licenses that we manufacture some things like our passive radar system and others. In other cases, we integrate, so we outsource the manufacturing to, the different providers. Like one person just does airframes, another person does the AI system. We integrate them together. Another person does the radar systems, the C2s. And again, we bring all those pieces together. So again, and it's a complex space because each of those different suppliers and vendors, the technology is changing there, from IR cameras to AI to turbines. It's a constantly moving space. Comms, it's a huge space. What do you do about comms? There's so many comm options out there, and so many different ways, and you need to keep costs down. And like I said, it's an emerging space across the entire breadth of the supply chain.
Yeah, and so you mentioned it, so I'm gonna go back to kind of the, Ukraine and Europe. What's probably the biggest thing that would surprise most Americans about how other countries in that area are approaching like drone technology, unmanned vehicles?
Well, I think first off, many countries are kind of all in on the drone space. I think we participate in the NATO counter UAS exercises in Latvia, and work pretty closely with some of the defense agencies and programs out there. And it's surprising to see, they have just like Ukraine has its own UAV kind of division, branch of the service that is happening in other places as well. So you see that in Latvia and Lithuania. Of course, the scale is so much smaller than the US because the budgets are smaller, the countries are smaller, and all the rest of that. But they're all in for whatever they have. So they'll take the limited resources they have and work very seriously on integrating all their defense architecture against drones, against long distance strike drones, and all the rest of that, and creating also layers of air defense, practicing on a continual basis of that. You look at countries like Poland, putting 4 or 5% of their budget, exceeding the NATO minimum, into defense, because this is the first time that country has had independence of another country in over 200 or 300 years. So this is the longest stretch of independence that they've had, and they don't want to lose it. So there's a lot of urgency. I think is very different than in America, and just because of the war with Ukraine, and we'll see what happens. I mean, the other challenge, of course, is China, because they absolutely have a 5 or 10 year head start over the U.S. in terms of the UAV space. The supply chain is there. We can't match their pricing in terms of infrared cameras or comms or any of that. So they've got a serious advantage over us in that area right now.
And I imagine you going to, Ukraine, it's the, world's largest live testing ground for technology. Is that where you're picking up a lot of, kind of your signals to drive your technology put?
There's no substitute for it. Like, the engineer who builds whatever the drone has his buddy in the trenches that he sends the drone to, and the guy gives him feedback the next day, what worked and what didn't work. And the fix is in a week later, right? There's no substitute for the kind of the product iteration cycle. It's not 3 to 6 months between tests and all the rest of that. This is like weekly basis, things are being fixed, hardware, software. And so, as I mentioned earlier, something that was, innovative one day, 6 months later is totally obsolete. There's a famous story. I don't know if I should say it, but there's a famous story in Ukraine right now. Oh, it's been a couple of years now. There's an American manufacturer that donated a certain kind of strike drone that has kind of tube launched, little wings snap out of it. I'm not going to mention the name, but it's quite well known and by one of the top U.S. Defense companies in the UAV space. And they delivered tens of thousands of those to Ukraine in the early days of the war, but they didn't work because they relied on GPS. And so there's this famous story about a warehouse full of these little strike drones, tube launch strike drones, all in a warehouse in Kyiv because no one can use them. And that's just an example of a development cycle that took years to develop that drone. I'm sure millions of dollars, and you can't do anything with it because it's useless. And it was probably made useless within 3 months.
Yeah. But it is crazy how fast, the in combat, the back and forth of, technology offensive, then the defensive, like got to pivot again. What's been over there and looked surprising to you that you've seen, just like from a technology advancement or where it's gone? Is there any like one thing that stands out to you, like right now?
People ask, what is it like being in Ukraine? And, obviously there's a lot of Americans. We have some people working for us that, have been over there and worked over there for special forces and were embedded there. But, I think the thing that is most, what I kind of say to that question is, Ukrainians love their country and they're not going to give up. And they hate the Russians for attacking and disturbing their life and their country and killing their people. And the level of, I don't want to just say hatred, but the love that they have for their country is, unequivocal, and they're not going to give up. That's for sure. When you go there, you realize that. People talk about the wait till the thing. These guys are not going to give up. It's impossible.
Yeah. So back to kind of the way you're structuring this, there are a lot of innovative firms, competing now with traditional primes on big programs like the Drone Dominance, as an example. Lots of companies, in order for, the DoW to select, let's say, a smaller company compared to these primes and be able to do that and then drive scale, because that's obviously a challenge for innovative kind of prototyping newer companies to then go to scale. Yeah. Is there anything that has to change to help make that work? Or is it just one of those, like from your perspective?
Yeah. So, Drone Dominance seeks to, achieve the kind of scale and output that would be needed by the United States in a peer type conflict. And just to give you an example, in Ukraine, they're producing about 15,000 drones a day. That's 5 to 6 million a year, right? In the U.S., we're probably producing 15,000 a year, right? There's
Right.
probably no more than that, right? So the point really here is how do we, ramp up if we had a peer type conflict, a peer adversary type conflict? How could the U.S. get to a space where it could defend itself and do whatever it needs. Where could it produce 15,000 drones a day, right? That's what drone dominance got started as. And right now, that drone dominance first appropriation, a little over, about 1.5 billion. There's enough money in there to produce 350,000 drones. Okay. So we would still need 20x times that to get to where Ukraine is right now, right? In terms of production. Of course, their drones cost $500 a piece and ours would cost $4,000 a piece. So that's kind of the challenge. But the main point here is not in answer to your question is that the scale of building drones is currently not something that the primes are doing. They're building exquisite systems, billion-dollar, trillion-dollar systems, many millions of parts. Some of them, again, they've been doing this they're the best in the world for what they do, of course. But in this case, it's a different product. These are simpler products. And, is this the space they want to get involved in? I don't know. What we are seeing, and the reason we're involved in this space and we have very good partners is there's a lot of interest in the automotive sector to get involved in the drone space. And not just in the US, it's actually all over the world. I go to Korea, all the parts manufacturers are trying to build drones. In Europe, all the parts manufacturers are trying to build drones. It's crazy. And the same is happening here in the US. So we partner with Lax Enterprises, the world's largest injection molding company in the world. They produce all of the F-150 grills and you name it, everything. They can crank out 10,000 a day right on their injection molding presses, right? That's what the Department of War wants. They want World War II level capacity, if we need it, to flip a switch and start cranking these suckers out. And that's kind of what drone dominance is about. And to answer your question, how the small firms can do it, there's no firm right now that can do 10 or 15,000 a day. It's impossible. But bringing, as we do, our technologies and combining that with U.S. manufacturing capacity, in particular in the automotive industry, that's our kind of ace in the hole, right? That's how we're taking this technology and bringing it to scale. And we'd like to do that with the interceptors as well.
Well, I'll get to that side. But do you think this approach will work? I mean, again, it's almost like, hey, it'll bring us a lot of ideas, from an acquisition system. Just how is that going to have to change for this to work?
Well, I mean, go back to World War I or World War II, the airplane manufacturers, how, small they were and, how experimental in some ways many of those technologies were. And how, the government and the Department of Defense and the Army and so forth had to take big bets on these companies. And not all the bets worked out, but a good number did. And, the American ingenuity and hard work is unparalleled, no question about it. And I don't have any doubts that, anything that we set our minds to in this country we'll be able to accomplish. So however we get there.
Hopefully don't get there out of dire need like Ukraine is.
Right. Yeah, I know. Of course, that they're very smart people too, and they work very hard.
So if you look at then kind of your missile, the Talos. Tell me a little about the Talos. I think that's interesting. Just the idea behind it and what you're doing.
Okay, so the basics are that, as I said, everyone or three of our major adversaries, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are, using these cheap long distance strike drones, the Shahed, the 136, and also now the 239, the jet version, and, wreaking havoc. Billions and billions of dollars of Gulf infrastructure, allied and U.S. infrastructure just, eliminated completely. $1 billion radars in Bahrain knocked out by a Shahed, right? And these things only cost $50,000. And then we've got the problem of magazine depths. So long distance is fine, but you got, magazine depth issues. Then you've got your short range, SHORAD and CRAM, but that's like last ditch defense, right? And so really the need is for a mid-range, inexpensive interceptor that is on par in terms of cost with the Shahed. So think $50,000 or in that neighborhood, sub 100,000. And that's where our jet interceptor system comes in, the TALOS-J. It has a range of 200 kilometers, flies 450 to 500 kilometers an hour, can reach a Shahed within 12 minutes at 150 kilometers, and has an AI sensor combined with an infrared camera, locks onto the heat signature of the Shahed, very specific that way, and can take out a whole swarm of them if need be. And Iran is not sending them the same way that Russia is. Russia's sending them in 500 batches across a 2,000 kilometer front. So it's much, much more complicated in Ukraine right now in terms of the air defense, but it's a much, much more dense air defense situation there in general. Very fascinating. I could go into that as well if you wanted me to, but right now the basics are for the Talis. We have a layered defense architecture there, where we use the medium distance radars like the Saab Giraffe to get to the 200-kilometer range, track the incoming targets, send that telemetry and other kind of data to the flight computer of the Talis, launch it within 8 or 10 minutes of detection, and intercept it within 12 minutes. And if the TALOS-J fails, for any particular reason, we have the second layer of the defense, which is electric interceptors that can engage the targets at up to 40 kilometers. And there we use a slightly different radar, more close range, also 3D radar, and we're able to intercept there. And there we're able to send many more than just the Talis. We'll send 4 to 5 Talises against a swarm of targets, but you can, with the electrics, because they're even more inexpensive, you can send up to a dozen at a single time against incoming threats. So again, it's a layered architecture and a layered solution, and I think that's what's needed for these inexpensive distance strike drones that are coming in. And that's what Ukraine is using, and we're going to need to kind of copy that. Frankly, the only real solution is kinetic. You can't wait until they're at a high value target. By then, it's too late. You turn your CRAM on. That's a last ditch at that point anyway, and you already lost the battle. And I would say the same with all drone strikes in general and all counter UAS. If you're sitting around at a high value target with your defense stuff, you already lost the battle. You have to go out to the operators just like they do in Ukraine, take them out where they come from. Just to the FPV example, I say this quite often because I see this all the time in Ukraine, but also at the NATO exercises. FPVs have the advantage. Drones have the advantage. It's impossible to almost protect against them. It's like, imagine going into the woods and you put on your insect repellent and you hope you're not going to get bit. Well, if you go into the woods, you're inevitably going to get bit no matter what you put on, right? There's not a chance. And it's the same with FPVs. They only need to bite you once and you're done, right? But counter UAS systems have to be right all the time. They can't be wrong, not even once, right? So that's what we're dealing with. And they only have to be right once, and they're cheap, $500 a pop. But they can take out a $10 million system, no problem. And we see that all the time. 90% of the casualties now in Ukraine are FPV related, drone related. 90%, there's no one shooting at each other anymore. No tanks shooting at it, no artillery. It's all FPV. It's drone on drone. That's the future. Machines against machines. That's what we're looking at. Tens of thousands of machines against machines. That's the future.
Yeah, I love the way you're tackling this. Well, what is your Talis, because it becomes we're stuck in the economic battle, right? We're getting our asses kicked by launching, multi-million-dollar weapons at $2,000 drones or cheaper,
Right.
or shooting, AIM 9Xs or whatever, it's crushing us. And I know we're slowly starting to make that pitch. What is the, Talis, just perspective wise, where does that fall in kind of a cost category? Because you're talking about, I mean, something to go 450 miles an hour ain't cheap.
Okay, if Lockheed Martin built it, yeah, it's not going to be cheap. If Shield AI is building it, no, it's not going to be cheap. But you get companies like ours taking Ukrainian tech, also, some of the airframes we make and the turbines. The parts themselves are not, particularly expensive altogether. Putting it together is not particularly. There's nothing like revolutionary about any of this technology. AI, all this AI stuff is coming off the shelf, frankly, at this point, and I think everyone's using the same AI programs, right? So it's like a whole new world. The barrier to entry for systems integrators is, not the same as it would be for developing a space shuttle or something like that. You know what I'm getting at? So to answer your question, for Talis, we just use the best of what's available, bring it all together, and price is very important. And I think price is important for our customers as well. Our Gulf customers don't want to be spending $1 million on an interceptor. You know, they'll do it if they have to, but they would much rather spend $100,000 on an interceptor. You see what I'm saying? And have more of them because the threat is not diminishing, and they are using inexpensive things too. So the price to intercept has to go down. There's no way about it because the price of a strike is so small right now. I was at a conference a couple years ago at AAD, and I couldn't believe it. They were lined up in Africa at the Chinese booths, literally buying air forces for pennies on the dollar. And when I mean air forces, I mean the effectiveness of an air force, right? For pennies on the dollar, because you can do that all now with drones, bombing, strafing, whatever, right? It does not cost, you don't need $1 trillion to have an air force anymore.
Yeah. So, if you look at like the history of conflict, like air to air, like where I come from, so you got, we're using guns, then we get 8 missiles, then we got radar missiles in Vietnam, we don't even need a gun on the F-4 anymore. And then the defense has changed. So offensive has now been negated. So now we need to put guns back on because those have been, inconsequential. And then it goes, so it's just this back and forth between offensive capability, defensive capability. In drone warfare, is your perspective that same model exists where our defenses will get good enough to eliminate kind of the FPV threats, and then we'll go back to now these more exquisite systems?
I think it's going to take a long time because the cost of offensive weapons is so low right now, and the capacity is totally not even fully tapped. I mean, we know that China can field 50,000 drones from one single computer, and you've all seen those trucks that lay out whole racks, thousands of FPVs in one shot. And of course, they're doing it for the drone shows, but they can do it for attacking a base. If there's a base that, has a 20,000 or 50,000 FPV swarm coming at it, there's nothing you can do about it in terms of the defense kinetically. The high power microwave, some of these touted systems, that are out there. I'm not going to name all the manufacturers, but the guys on the ground say it doesn't work. The guys doing air defense say it does not work. That is it. Those are exquisite systems being fielded now, lasers, HPM, all of that, trying to take out drone swarms. There's just no way to do it right now. The only way eventually to do it would be just, as I said, drone on drone, where you've got swarm against swarm doing it, or other kinds of things. So example, we have, as I said, I think, my philosophy on counter UAS is don't sit around at the high value target. You got to go out after where they are. Don't, you got to hit them before they hit you. And so from that perspective, we've set up, we have a heavy lift drone called Atlas-6. As I said, it can carry 50 kilos, have 10 hours of endurance, fly at 15,000 feet. And it's like a small helicopter. You can put anything on it, glide bombs. It's like a small helicopter. Yeah, but it's 1/100th of the price of a small helicopter. Every unit could have one for its own close air support. It's amazing. Anyway.
But to fly for 10 hours?
Yeah, so it's an inverse, yeah, because it has you could put a tank on it, a 50-liter tank, and it'll fly for 10 hours. Yeah, that's amazing. So we're putting on that one for a counter UAS solution. We also have the mothership version of it, but where it drops FPVs. So it can fly 700 miles, by the way, right, on that 10 hours, right? And it could, with Starlink, right, fly 10 hours, drop FPVs, do target, fly back. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, so for a counter UAS solution for that, we've decided to put not quite a minigun, but a micro gun on it. Instead of shooting 7.62, we shoot 5.56, also 6,000 rounds a minute. So we can put about 800 to 1,000 rounds on Atlas 6 with a micro gun. It's a 16-pound micro gun. And it shoots, 1 second burst is 50 rounds, and it can hit targets at 200 meters, 200 to 300 meters. So it's like a shotgun spread, but at 200 meters, right? So that's really what you're going to want with a nice targeting system where if you see a swarm out there, you've got an aircraft that is pivoting with a gimbal and, knocking out drones from 200 meters. And that's what's needed, kinetic solutions. EW doesn't work. Everything's going to be autonomous anyway. So RF jamming is totally obsolete already. Everything's either autonomous or fiber. So, the only way to hit is with kinetics.
Awesome. Well, I would love to continue. I think let's wrap it up. I'm going to give you some just like lightning round, just real quick. You may have answered already, just a couple questions. What do you think the biggest myth or misconception is about selling to the Department of War?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that it's a single kind of way of thinking or anything like that. I think there's a lot of really good people there, a lot of innovation, great breadth. The best of America is there, and I think there's just a lot of creativity. And I believe that overall it's built to solve problems and can adapt. I know that there's a lot of questions whether or not it's too big to adapt, and maybe it's using old Cold War model or this or that. But frankly, it's smart people out there too trying to adapt the system. And I think drone dominance, despite its flaws, demonstrates a willingness to take risks, which is important. And in this space, we don't have the time to always get it right. Sometimes you have to build a plane as you fly it.
Hardest lesson so far you've learned in building a defense company?
The hardest lesson I've learned, I would say, make sure it works with your own eyes before you tell someone it works. You know what I'm saying? So, believe but verify.
What's the number one piece of advice you would give to someone starting a defense tech company?
Well, again, I think the barrier to entry is relatively low compared to, the way it was previous. But, again, like many things, there's lots of great industries that are in a state of growth, AI being one of them, drones and UAVs being another. I think in these, historical opportunities to get involved in a new industry, the window is still there. So I would say do it.
Love it. Sacred cow and defense tech you think will be proven false?
No, I think part of that is going to be these legacy systems, whether it's aircraft carriers or tanks or whatever, that still hold our imagination, to some degree, and are able to project power. But it's going to be interesting to see how power is being projected down the road. I think that's going to be an interesting lesson for everybody. And again, I feel like, if you can build an Air Force, the effectiveness of an Air Force for pennies on the dollar, we're going to need to move quickly to make sure that our investments are also as efficient. Does that make sense? Like if we're buying $1 billion bomber, we need to make sure that it's still going to be as effective as 10,000 drones that can accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. That's all time we're going to have today. But if folks want to follow what you're doing, kind of the latest and greatest with you, how best would they do that?
I think the best is just look us up on LinkedIn. I think that it's become really our go-to for making our announcements and so forth. So Adler Aerospace on LinkedIn, or you can also visit our website at AdlerAerospace.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Will. This has been super fun.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I'd love to connect sometime to do more. So appreciate your time, and we'll stay in touch.